Hello everyone, Stormer1 here. Today we'll be having an update on the significant severe weather potential that's going to be coming into Kentucky Friday night and another chance Saturday. Before I get started on this video, I do want to apologize in advance of the fan noise in the background, maybe obnoxious to some viewers. It's hot up here. I even have a dog up here with me. He's burning up. Got to keep the dog cooled down. So I want to apologize in advance for the fan noise in the background. With that out of the way, let's get started with the watch warning advisory display across the country, and things are getting active out west. Got fire weather and wind issues that's going to be occurring out there, and you see these tan like boxes here, or gold I should say. These here are high wind warnings, and let me tell you something, the winds in eastern New Mexico into the panhandle of Texas could very well be extreme. With such a powerhouse of a low ejecting out of Colorado, some areas could expect wind gusts anywhere from 80 to 90 miles per hour. Those are not thunderstorms, those are wind gradient type of winds out there. So extreme wind event for some of those areas out there, plus fire weather is going to be a big problem. You got high winds, you got dry air, and you got the milder temperatures. So conditions will be pretty favorable for wildfires out there as well. Locally in Kentucky, we do have a wind advisory that includes most of central and all of western Kentucky. Expect that to get expanded to include probably all of Kentucky. Probably by tomorrow or maybe even tomorrow night. I think all of Kentucky should be included in a wind advisory where we could see potential for 40 to 50 mile per hour winds beginning tomorrow afternoon and even going into Saturday. Temperatures, it was pretty darn nice out there today. Highs were in the 70s for most areas. Even some places got even around the 80-degree mark. You got a few Messiness stations in western and a couple in eastern Kentucky that was able to hit the 80-degree mark. It was also a little bit breezy out there. Some stronger wind gusts noted down towards south central Kentucky. Those, I believe, are thunderstorm-related wind gusts. And if we look at radar right now, we still got some thunderstorms continuing out there. And the more intense thunderstorm activity right now, it's kind of in east central Kentucky. We got one south of West Liberty, and we got a couple more cells not too far away from Salt Lick and Lakeview Heights in eastern Kentucky. We even had some thunderstorms down towards London and Corbin and even Barberville. Those there are starting to die down. As the sun sets, these storms will start to die down. We even had quite a few hail reports, especially from a strong storm for parts of Louisville into Mount Washington. Had multiple reports of pea-sized hail and even a report of hail the size of dimes and even half-inch size hail as well. And we even have a report of penny-sized hail not too far away from Albany down in southern Kentucky. So some of these storms were able to produce a decent amount of hail and even some strong wind gusts. So here's the SPC outlook for tonight. Got a marginal risk down across parts of Alabama, southwestern Georgia, and the Florida Panhandle. And then tomorrow, we have a moderate risk for severe weather from southeastern Iowa through eastern Missouri, a large chunk of Illinois, and even far northeastern Arkansas and far northwestern Tennessee, and it even includes parts of far western Kentucky, which would include Fulton County, Paducah. I think Mayfield's included as well in that moderate risk area. We'll have a closer view of that severe weather risk, and you can see that moderate risk including Paducah, and then the enhanced risk extends out towards just to the east of Owensboro, even pretty close to Russellville, even Beaver Dam, even in the enhanced risk. And then the slight risk extends as far east as just about to the 127 corridor. Obviously, the more significant chance for severe weather would be in western Kentucky, and this is basically after midnight. Most of this is going to be happening during the overnight hours, which is not really ideal for severe weather, but considering you have a strong southerly wind, it's going to keep your temperatures milder overnight, which will help keep some instability in place throughout the night out there. And if we talk about the Pacific threats here, here's the tornado potential. And you can see here areas that are in the enhanced and the moderate risk got a 10% chance of seeing a tornado, and there's even a chance for a strong tornado in there as well. You do have that 5% tornado concord that would include Bowling Green, not quite to Louisville or E-Town, but it will also include Tell City, Indiana, and that very low tornado risk gets as far east as almost to the 127 corridor out there. So there's that potential for some tornadoes out there, and the majority of these tornadoes would be quick spin-up tornadoes. But there may very well be a different story in western Kentucky where we'd be talking about the potential for maybe some stronger tornadoes, which is EF2 or greater. But the primary hazard is going to be damage winds. We're going to have a ton of wind energy with this system, which some of those storms may transport some of that wind energy in the upper levels, try to transport them down towards the surface, which could lead to potential for some damage winds. And you also see the hatched area, and that hatched area indicates potential for 75-mile-per-hour winds or greater. So some significant damage winds could be possible. And then finally, the hail outlook. There is some potential for some hail out there. Greatest potential for large hail would be in far western Kentucky. That hatch area does indicate the potential for some 2 inches in diameter hail, or maybe a little bit greater than that. So some very large hail could be on the table out there. I'm not as confident with the hail threat down with everything else. Let's go back to this website here, back to the SPC Outlook and the national-wide view. If we go to day 3, which is Saturday, we got a big moderate risk for parts of Louisiana, large chunk of Mississippi and Alabama. The enhanced risk includes pretty much nearly all of the deep south, and even that enhanced risk does get into parts of far southern Kentucky. So if we go here, you can see that enhanced risk does include almost just about to Bowling Green here. Some of those southern Kentucky counties are included in enhanced risk. Meanwhile, basically the rest of the state is in that slight risk. And here's the probability outlook here. There is some potential for significant severe weather in the enhanced risk area. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if we see this get expanded a little bit farther to the north to include more of south central Kentucky. Maybe either later tonight or maybe tomorrow out there. And then we go to day 4, which is Sunday. Severe weather risk is more focused towards the east coast from the mid-Atlantic region down towards northern Florida. And the severe weather threat will be out of Kentucky by that time. So we're going to get started with the high-risk NAM. Let's talk about some of the modeling here. And the main in the model we're going to look at today is the high-risk NAM. So we'll have those storms there die out tonight and mostly clear skies. And we do expect the total lunar eclipse tonight. And the peak of the lunar eclipse is going to be, I think, past 2 o'clock. So 2 to 3 a.m. is when the total lunar eclipse is going to be occurring. Sky should be mostly clear. What happens is that the moon turns red. So, and from what I've heard, I've never seen it before in person, but from what I've heard, it's kind of wild to look at. So, yeah. So we got the total lunar eclipse tonight. The sky should be mostly clear. And as we get into Friday, winds start to gust up from the southwest. Temperatures will be I wouldn't say very warm, but pretty warm out there. Upper 70s to low 80s out there. And you can see off to our west, we get this big line of storms that forms over parts of Missouri and up into Iowa. Those may have potential for destructive winds and even some tornadoes. But as you get south of St. Louis, You can see those storms down there are not quite linear, they're more discrete. That increases the tornadic potential because with more discrete cells, it can be a little bit easier to produce some tornadoes, especially for the stronger tornadoes. And normally, your strong tornado threats are more within supercells than squall lines. Squall lines are more for weak, brief spin-up tornadoes, while supercells can produce stronger tornadoes out there, and they can last a little bit longer too. So it will arrive in western Kentucky past midnight. Really past midnight is when the severe weather threat begins in far western Kentucky, and these may very well be in a form of supercells out there, or more of a broken line out there. And almost as severe weather as possible, as we talked about with the SPC outlook. And what's going to happen here is as we go through the wee hours of Saturday morning, so we're going to start to notice a weakening trend. One of the reasons why is that the air is pretty dry out towards central Kentucky, which will help weaken the storms. Plus, the jet streak's going to be out there, which we'll talk about that in a little bit, is going to be weakening. So you don't get as much lift in the atmosphere. So storms will be kind of a weakening trend as you kind of go through parts of Saturday morning. And you can see here they pretty much collapse before they get into eastern Kentucky. Though, knowing the high-res NAM, sometimes it weakens these storms a little bit too quick. So I think it will last a little bit longer than what is being shown here. I still think eastern Kentucky can get a few showers at least out of this, maybe a couple storms potentially, but it's not going to be as impressive as it could be in western Kentucky late Friday night out there. And speaking of those 500 millbar winds, let's talk about that. So we'll have this jet streak that's going to come across eastern Oklahoma, and you can see it's a pretty nasty jet streak. I mean, anywhere from 100 to upwards of 135 knots. Powerful jet streak, and that's what's really going to help intensify this squall line of storms that will initiate in Missouri and up towards Iowa. But look what happens as it gets farther to the east. You start to see how that jet streak begins to weaken. That's something to watch out for, because if it ends up weakening a little bit quicker, that means the storms, maybe as they get into western Kentucky, might be a little bit weaker, and perhaps it may not be as intense. So we got to keep an eye on the trends of the jet streak here to see if it ends up continuing on a week, if it ends up trending weaker. That could be something that could be in play Friday night, and that may end up creating the significant severe weather threat to be a little bit more conditional late Friday night. So that's going to be something worth watching, is how the jet streak is going to evolve. Because you can see here it goes from, like 135 knots all the way down to maybe 75 to 85 knots. So now this type of jet streak will still be supportive for some storms. It'll still be, but it won't be big and tall or anything like that. So we'll still get storms out there regardless, but the jet streak, I think, is really going to determine the severity, but also you may have but also how much moisture you're going to have, and also how much instability we could be talking about here. So that's a factor to keep an eye on. Another thing too is the LOVA jet, and this is something we're very confident with. And the LOVA jet really helps increase the amount of wind shear in your environment. So you can see as the storms get into western Kentucky, you got a LOVA jet anywhere from about 70 to upwards of 80 knots. Pretty impressive LOVA jet, and normally with a LOVA jet like that, you're going to get a ton of wind shear in the environment, which would be very supportive for severe weather. So there's definitely not going to be a shortage of wind shear for Friday night's setup. And we'll start talking about, the thermodynamics. So we know in terms of wind energy, very supportive from the LOVA jet. 500 millbar winds may be a little bit questionable in terms of the exact intensity. But let's move on to the thermodynamics. So dew points. Really ideal for severe weather would be dew points north of 60. But with a setup like this, upper 50s can still get the job done. But low 60 dew points are more ideal. So you can see here with the storms here, kind of entering, western Kentucky here. Dew points generally right around 60. That would be enough to support some severe weather. But as we get into the overnight hours, the dew points kind of drop off a little bit. But as soon as those storms have reached I-65 corridor, it outruns the favorable moisture. And you can see how dry it is in eastern Kentucky. Low 50 dew points. You're not going to be able to get severe weather with low 50 dew points out there. However, back towards western Kentucky, dew points are still right around 60 out there, even behind the storms out there. And this is one of the main reasons why the greatest threat for severe weather for Friday night will be in western Kentucky, because that's where most of the moisture is going to be. Meanwhile, for eastern Kentucky, the air is just going to be too dry, though some showers could potentially linger out there. And let's talk about instability, and we'll check out surface-based CAPE. And usually surface-based CAPE above 1,000 joules per kilogram is quite favorable for severe weather. But with the amount of wind shear we're going to have, even with 500 joules per kilogram CAPE can still be enough to support some severe weather. And you can see here we got this, nose of 1,000 to maybe even upwards of 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE. And you can see here's your storms right there, and you can see how that overlaps with the greatest amount of instability. So we're going to have more than enough CAPE to support severe weather, at least for far western Kentucky. You can see here the farther east you go, those instability values start to go down. Now, there will be some elevated instability out there, which basically means instability in the upper parts of the atmosphere. We lose the surface-based instability, kind of along the I-65 corridor, which whenever you don't have surface-based instability, it lowers the threat for damaging winds and tornadoes. So there's some good news. The only downside about not having surface-based instability and having elevated instability is that it increases the hail risk. So you may see some of these storms maybe transfer from what would probably be a dominant damaging wind to tornado risk to maybe a little bit more of a hail risk. So some hail could be possible with these storms before they really go away. But I don't think the hail's going to be that, terribly large or anything out there. And let's talk about some forecast soundings here. And you know what? Before we go there, we're going to check out the supercell composite. And this kind of gives you an idea of the combination of instability and wind shear and how favorable the environment could be just for supercells in general. And you can see those very favorable parameters out in Missouri and northeastern Arkansas. And you'll see how these parameters do drop as you kind of go for the night as we start to lose some of that instability here. And we're going to get a sounding out here in the western Kentucky here. Let's go close to Paducah and see what the Higher Sam's got for us out there. And it may take a minute to load here. My internet's running a little bit slow this evening. We're almost there. Okay, here we go. So, based off of this sounding here, if we first go ahead and look at our skew T, which is over here, obviously you can see we got more elevated instability than surface-based instability. Especially if you look at the numbers down here. Surface-based CAPE is north of 1100, which is good enough, but most unstable CAPE is up as high as 1500. And that most unstable CAPE is probably being found, up in this area up in here. So we'll probably have more instability in the upper levels of the atmosphere than towards the surface. Another thing that's important here is that we got an elevated mix layer working in here. An elevated mix layer right in here, which the green line is your dew point line, your red line is the temperature line. When the green line is farther away from the red line, that's an indication of dry air, which is something that I've kind of highlighted in here. So this is drier air, and this is basically your elevated mix layer. Normally, when you have an elevated mix layer, it helps kind of clean up the atmosphere a little bit, and it can also help increase instability, and it can even increase your hail risk, potential for some large hail. So we kind of have an elevated mix layer kind of working in for us. Another way of looking at the elevated mix layer is the lap rates. Surface-based lap rates is not impressive, which is kind of ideal for during the overnight hours. Normally in the overnight hours, surface-based lap rates are not all that great. However, if you go to the upper parts of the atmosphere, you can see those numbers getting up as high as a 7.9, and that's an indication of the elevated mix layer working in there, so that can support the potential for large hail. So we got that, and there's also another product called D-Cape, which will be right here. It's 882, so that can support damage winds. And of course, we got a ton of wind energy out there, so there is that possibility for maybe some significant wind out there. That'd be another thing to closely monitor. We also got quite a bit of moisture down towards the surface here. Not a lot of dry air out there, which really isn't the worst thing in the world. And when we're talking about wind shear, let's go back over here and talking about the wind direction with height. So at the surface, winds are, southeast, southeast winds at the surface. But as you go up towards, 850 millibars, which would be right here, winds now turn from the southwest, and they turn more southwesterly as you get to 700 millibars. That's wind change of direction with height, and when you get an updraft going in there, it helps the winds, those turning winds, to be more vertical. So you get rotating updrafts within these storms, which can increase your potential for tornadoes. So we got that, and if you look at some of your wind shear numbers, SRH numbers are anywhere from 500 to maybe almost 700. That's more than enough to support severe weather. Shear and knots, 50, right around 50. That's also more than enough to support severe weather. And the last thing is the hodograph up here. And you can see there, it definitely supports supercell-like structures. And another thing that's important to mention is this line right here. When you have a line kind of going away from the main part of the storm, not only that can support large hail, but it can also help vent away heavy precipitation from tornadoes out there. So you got that going for you. So some of these tornadoes may not be rain wrapped out there, with the precipitation kind of venting away from the main circulation with some of these supercells. So overall, it's not a bad sounding at all. Maybe the only issue here, if you want to be technical, is this little inversion right here. That may be something to look for as well. See if that may become an issue. And that might be another thing too of why the storms may not be all that impressive, is because of that little inversion right there. And it may disrupt the storm's updrafts out there. So that may be another thing to watch for, is that little inversion right there. So there is some limiting factors for, or I should say potential limiting factors out there for Friday night, but the ceiling is still quite high. So we'll start off with the 4. So I think at a minimum, there will be strong severe storms out there. Almost severe weather on the table, damage of winds, maybe some large hail. Tornadoes could be possible out there. And then when we're talking about the ceiling, we'll still have the potential for damage of winds. Some of those winds could be significant. Maybe potential for very large hail. And there's also a potential for long track, strong tornadoes. So that's basically the ceiling. Regardless of the scenarios, there's still going to be some severe weather out there. So make sure you have multiple ways to get warnings Friday night, which, a lot of people be sleeping, Friday night. So make sure you have multiple ways to get warnings Friday night, especially out in western Kentucky or west of I-65. But people that live along the 127 I-65 corridors, just in case it overperforms, make sure you have a way to get multiple warnings as well, as a lot of those folks in those areas will probably be sleeping as well. So let's move on to the next phase here. So let's talk about the next wave. So later in the day on Saturday. So after those storms pass us through, there's some concern regarding of how well we're going to stabilize. You got some model guys that will say there may be quite a bit of cloud cover out there, which can limit of how we can destabilize through Saturday afternoon. And there's other models like the HIRIS NAM shows that we got a pretty good element mixer coming in and will destabilize pretty well. And there's honestly more support showing us recovering than not, at least as it stands for the time being. So I think regardless here, we'll have just enough instability to support another round of some strong to severe storms. So as we get towards Saturday afternoon, very significant severe weather will likely be initiating maybe parts of Arkansas, Louisiana, into Mississippi. Very concerned about down into some of these areas in here, especially in Mississippi and Alabama, where we could be talking about the potential for long track, intense, maybe violent tornadoes out there. There's a very high ceiling, but the floor is not that low either down there. So folks down there should really keep a close eye on those forecasts, because concerns are quite high down there, and the ceiling is also very high down there. Meanwhile, for us up here in Kentucky here, we'll probably have some storms that will maybe form maybe mid to late afternoon, and that's ideal for severe weather in terms of the time of the day. That's around peak time heating out there, and I suspect that there's going to be some type of warm front boundary out here with this secondary low. And what I believe could happen here is that we're going to have some storms that form along or near that warm front boundary. And out ahead of that warm front boundary is an unstable air mass, especially across parts of central and western Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky, the air is still going to be too dry for storms. But if we do get some storms that forms, along that warm front, almost a severe weather could be possible. Damage to winds, large hail, some isolated tornadoes could be possible. However, this type of scenario might be a little bit conditional. And the reason why it could be conditional is what could happen, down south. If we end up getting a very good coverage of storms down across Mississippi, Alabama, and especially into Tennessee, those storms can actually rob our moisture return farther up north, which can help lower the potential for severe weather on Saturday. So that's another thing to kind of watch out for. And I'll show you guys the dew points here for the HIRIS NAM here in a minute. But you can see those storms are along the warm front, and I think those storms could be strong to severe. And then here's your secondary low. Now the model believes the secondary low is in here in western Tennessee or west central Tennessee. That might be more of a way of a mesoscale convective vortex. The actual surface low, based off of this model, is actually going from far western Kentucky, based off of the HIRIS NAM, which in this scenario here will be in the warm sector for this one. And out ahead of this, or just to the east of the low pressure system, is where there could be a line of some strong to severe storms that may stretch from western Kentucky down through Tennessee, down into Mississippi and Alabama. And you will be able to see this evolution here from the HIRIS NAM. Could be a pretty intense cluster of thunderstorms roaming through middle Tennessee, and that could stretch down into Mississippi and Alabama. And that strong severe potential may exist all the way up towards the Bluegrass region, based off of the HIRIS NAM. And then this is about as far out as it can go. And you can see by Saturday night, we got 987 millbar low over Indianapolis out there, with the potential for strong severe storms perhaps continuing across parts of southeastern Kentucky. Let's talk about the wind dynamics with this. And you can see here, as that secondary low gets its act together, Unlike Friday night, which the winds are going to be weakening, at 500 millibars for the storms Friday night, the storms on Saturday, or the winds on Saturday, is actually going to be increasing. It's going to be the opposite. You're going to see the winds here get stronger right in here and head up towards Kentucky. You're going to see that happen. So early in the day on Saturday, you probably have a jet streak of anywhere from about 80 to 90 knots out there. So not too impressive. But look what starts to happen here as you start to get into, Saturday evening. The winds begin to increase. Now you're starting to get winds approaching 100 knots. So you're going to have an increasing jet streak at 500 millibars. And out ahead that jet streak is where we're likely going to see some storms. What you can see right in here's your storms. Here's your main jet streak out here. And there could very well be a secondary jet streak a little bit farther off to the east out there. So you kind of get this split flow at 500 millibars, which leads to quite a bit of lift in between here. And that's where we start to see those storms out there indicated by the high-res NAM. And you can see how those winds there do continue to increase even into Saturday night. And now you got a jet streak of 100 to 110 knots in western Kentucky by Saturday night, which by that point Saturday night we may not have much instability to work with, but the wind dynamics would be more impressive by this time than compared to Saturday afternoon out there. And then let's talk about the Lova Jet out there. So you can see the Lova Jet winds do back off Saturday afternoon, but you start to see the warm front coming up, and it's pretty easy to tell where your warm front is based off at the 850 millibar wind. So your Lova Jet, the warm front is kind of right in here. And you'll see this warm front move very quickly to the north. This is going to be a fast moving warm front. And that could be a focus point where we can see some scattered storms develop out there. And some of those storms can be strong or severe. And you can see how the warm front really moves across Kentucky fairly quickly. And you can see out ahead that line of storms is where you see the strongest of Lova Jet really kicking the gear. And you're really going to see these winds, really pick up here as you get into Saturday evening and especially Saturday night. And check out the Lova Jet here. You got a Lova Jet winds of anywhere from 70 to 85 knots. So very strong Lova Jet out there, especially when you get into Saturday night, which is pretty normal. Usually you have a Lova Jet that gets stronger as you go for the overnight hours compared to during the day. So this is fairly normal to see. But this is a very strong Lova Jet. And like I was saying earlier, typically with a stronger Lova Jet, it increases the amount of wind shear in your atmosphere out there. And with a Lova Jet like this, wind shear values are going to be way up there for sure. Okay, now let's talk about a little bit about thermodynamics. We're going to go back to surface-based CAPE here. So behind that decaying line of storms, instability is going to increase here, especially as you get into Saturday afternoon, and where we do have plenty of daytime heating, at least indicated by the high-res NAM. Instability could be maximum out somewhere between 1,000 to maybe upwards of 2,000 joules per kilogram. But you can see how the instability really moves up to the north, kind of along that warm front. The warm front's kind of somewhere down here, but by this point here, we'll have pretty decent amount of thunderstorm activity up along along the warm front. So it makes sense that the instability values really drop when those storms do initiate late Saturday, late afternoon on Saturday. And then here comes the next big question here. So with those storms passing through along the warm front, there may be some dry time, but the big question is how much instability we're going to have out ahead of this line of storms. Is there going to be a lot of instability, or is it going to be weak instability? And what I think is going to be happening here is that the instability is not going to be that impressive. I think instability out ahead of the line maybe anywhere from 250 to upwards of maybe 400 or maybe even pushing 500 joules per kilogram. Now with a setup like this, all you really need is probably closer to 500 joules per kilogram cape, and that can support severe weather. And let me tell you, squall lines tend to be very sufficient under a highly sheared and low instability environments. They tend to be quite sufficient. So that's something that I want to mention out there. So even though instability may not be that impressive, considering the amount of wind shear we could have, we can still be talking about a line of some strong and severe storms here. Saturday evening out there. And you can see here, as you get well past sunset, how those instability values just drop out there. And let's talk about the dew points here, because that's another important thing. So dew points right around 60 would favor severe weather with this type of setup. But here's the interesting part. As the storms initiate down in the deep south, down in Mississippi, Louisiana, look what happens to the dew points. You start to see how those storms down to our south rob our moisture. So we kind of go from the low to mid 60s to right at Saturday evening, more into the upper 50s to maybe right around 60. And that's another factor to watch, because if those storms down south end up stealing too much moisture, then the potential for severe weather would be low later in the day on Saturday. However, if the cover of storms are not that great down south, then we can have more moisture to work with, which could lead to more instability for Saturday afternoon into the evening round. And that's a question we haven't figured out just yet. And I don't think we're going to get that figured out until either later today, tomorrow, or Saturday morning. I think we'll have a set in stone idea by Saturday morning about that question. And I don't think the model is going to handle that good with moisture return with a setup like this. And a lot of times models do tend to underestimate moisture return, especially early on in the spring. So it could be possible that some of these dew point numbers could be too low, but when you put in the other factor of the storms down and across the deep south stealing our moisture, it does create quite a bit of uncertainty for the next round of potential for some severe weather out there. And let's pull up the SuperTech composite. So you can see here the parameters are not as impressive out there for severe weather in general. Now you'll notice here probably early in the day on Saturday, pretty supportive for severe weather, but there's not really a lift mechanism for storms to form. So even though you may have a very favorable environment for severe weather, like out in western Kentucky, late Saturday morning to the early afternoon, there's not really a trigger for the storms. There will be a trigger for the storms when the warm front approaches out there. So that's just something that I want to mention here. But as soon as those storms do form along the warm front, you start to see the SuperTech composite parameters go down, but also at the same time, with the storms ongoing down towards Mississippi and Alabama, you also start to see the SPC values go down up here in Kentucky. So you end up going from early in the day on Saturday, maybe up as high as a 6 or a 9, down to maybe like a 2 to a 4 out there. So it does make quite a difference here. So I want to start off with, around peak time heating Saturday here, where we may have the potential there for some storms along the warm front. And honestly, in my opinion, I think those there may have a better chance for being strong and severe than this line of storms, just because we're going to have more instability to work with this round of storms here. So let's get a sounding out here. Kind of before those storms initiate. We'll go in western Kentucky here, and let's get a forecast sounding out there. And it may take a minute here to load. There's something else I wanted to mention here, but I kind of forgot. of what I want to mention here. I may get back up here maybe in a few moments. But here's the forecast sounding, out ahead of that warm front. And you can see here we're going to have plenty of instability to work with. Surface-based capes up to 2100. That's more than enough. But you also notice here wind energy is not the best. It's definitely not going to be as strong as Friday night, or even out ahead of that line of storms Saturday evening. But it's still strong enough to support some severe weather. And I'll tell you for one thing, low level shear is not that impressive, but we got stronger upper level shear up here than down towards the surface. With wind shear like that, that can support the potential for large hail. Especially when you got instability values, 1 to 2,000 out there. That can also support some large hail. But another thing I want to closely monitor is the elevated mix layer. How strong is the elevated mix layer is going to be? Because if the elevated mix layer ends up being stronger than anticipated, we can have a cleaner warm sector, and that can lead to more instability, and we could see more severe weather later today on Saturday. Now, if the elevated mix layer ends up being weaker, we could be talking about a messier mode of storms, and that can lower the severe weather potential for later today on Saturday. So that's another thing to monitor out there, or at least I should rather say factor out there. But just based off of looking at these numbers here and just the sounding in general, this is a sounding that would support potential for damaging winds, large hail, and maybe even the potential for some isolated tornadoes. So we definitely got to keep an eye on those storms along that warm front, because those storms along the warm front will definitely have some severe weather potential out there. And the main window for those will probably be late in the afternoon on Saturday and probably into the early parts of the evening out there, depending on the speed of the warm front out there as well. And then let's get a forecast sounding out ahead of this line here. Now, the high-res NAM's got the line pretty far to the west, and knowing how the NAM family is, this might be a little bit too far to the northwest for my liking here. And sometimes the NAM family will have this northwest bias here. Sometimes it can be too far northwest with setups like these. So I want to put that out there real quick. But let's get a forecast sounding out there, out ahead of that line. What does it look like out ahead of that line? And you're going to see probably a ton of shear on this sounding here, which there's definitely, plenty of shear out there. And you can see here, this is a pretty ridiculous wind shear profile. From the surface all the way up to 700 millibars. That's pretty crazy. You got winds out of the southeast out the surface, and you go to 700 millibars, it's out of the southwest. Almost a completely different direction out there for the winds. And that would be very supportive for tornadoes with a wind shear profile like that. With a wind shear profile like that, that could be very supportive for tornadoes. Also, the hodograph is pretty massive out there. And usually with a highly sheared environment, the hodographs are so big, it basically goes off the chart a little bit. Which means you can have large hook echoes. If there is supercells out there, they can have a pretty good sized hook echo with them out there. And also when you talk about lap rates, now surface-based lap rates is not all that impressive. However, on this particular sounding, there's actually some pretty solid lap rates in the mid-levels in the atmosphere. Now, there is some disagreements of how strong the mid-level lap rates are going to be. Some models are weaker, but the high-res NAM is, I would say, it's a little bit bullish on its mid-level lap rates out there. But the most important part about all this is how much instability we're going to have in our atmosphere. And if we look at the numbers right here, surface-based CAPE is 191. That's honestly not very much, and it'll be hard for storms to be surface-based with numbers like that. However, you do have some elevated instability out there. Most unstable CAPE is up around 600. So there will be a decent amount of elevated instability out there, which would support general thunderstorms out there. But surface-based lap or surface-based CAPE is not that impressive here. We also have what could be an inversion around 700 millibars, so it would be pretty difficult for these storms here to be surface-based in an environment like this, which would lower the potential for damaging winds and tornadoes with a sounding like this. So right now, Saturday, it's not really a slam dunk right now. Overall here, there's still a lot of uncertainty here out there, but overall, just based off of the sounding here, some strong severe storms will be possible here, but confidence will definitely be low when you look at it sounding like that. Regardless, though, plenty of wind shear. Wind shear values are going to be way up there. You see those SRH numbers up around 900. That is ridiculously high. So regardless of how much instability you're going to have, there's going to be a ton of wind shear and out there. And like I said earlier, squall lines tend to be quite sufficient with highly wind sheared and low instability environments. So we really got to keep an eye on and see how much instability we're going to have, because I think that's going to be the true determining factor of how severe these storms could be later in the day Saturday. So overall, for Saturday, almost as severe weather are possible. Damaging winds, some large hail, tornadoes could be on the table. Two ways we got to watch out for is the storms along the warm front. Those are the ones I'm a little bit more concerned with, and in my opinion may have maybe kind of the better potential right now, in my opinion. Now, the ceiling could be quite high for the squall line. You can argue that, but I just don't think there's going to be a whole lot of instability for that line. There's definitely going to be plenty of instability out there out ahead of the thunderstorms along the warm front, and I think those are the ones that we really got to watch for, because those storms will more than likely be discrete. They'll be scattered in nature. They could be supercells, and I think the main hazard of those will be large hail, and there's even that potential for very large hail, though I think the very large hail risk is going to be conditional, and we'll also have to watch out for that tornado risk as well. So either way, just stay weather aware on Saturday. We'll have a little bit better idea on this tomorrow, but we'll definitely have the best idea on this Saturday morning. And there's a couple other things too on Saturday that I want to touch on very quick. One of those things is the gradient winds outside of the storms. It's going to be very windy out there regardless. Probably going to be some 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts out there. And there's potential for locally higher wind gusts out there. This is the highest NAM with the wind gusts. Now, this is assuming that we're going to have dry air from the surface all the way up in the atmosphere. Okay, so we're not going to have that for this particular setup here. So these numbers here, like you see wind gust forecasts of 63 knots around the Lake Cumberland area in miles an hour, that would be up around 70 mile per hour winds. That's not going to come true. That's not going to come true at all. We're going to have moisture out there. To be more realistic, I think wind gusts, 50, maybe even pushing 55 miles an hour would be the wording to say with this here. So wind gradient wind's going to be 40, 50 miles an hour with locally higher gusts of 55 miles an hour being possible Saturday evening out there, especially Saturday evening out there. And one more thing too is that we could see some training of storms where that low pressure system tracks, and where that low pressure system tracks is where we're going to see some of the heaviest rainfall numbers. Could be a potential swath of 2 to 4 inches of rain out there. It's still on the table, and wherever that sets up is where we could see some localized flooding issues out there. Outside of that, rainfall numbers like you see here would be lower. Could be talking about anywhere from about half an inch of rain to maybe upwards of an inch of rain, but wherever that low pressure system tracks is where we're likely to see the heaviest amounts, which you can see here in far western Kentucky. Could be anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of rain. And that's going to be a narrow corridor as well, and that could lead to some localized flooding issues as well. But anyways, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Guys, like this video, hit that like button. If you really like my channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notifications so you never miss an upload. If you guys got any questions, you put a comment section down below. I'll answer you guys' questions. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye and have a good day.